Welcome to the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking with Dr. Sam Fecich, a professor at Grove City College. We're going to be talking a little bit about teacher preparation, the purpose of education, and what we can do to improve schools across the country, focusing particularly on what we can do to improve teacher preparation to then, in turn, improve the schools. Sam, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great, Ryan. How are you? Thanks so much for having me on the ClassCast.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing this. I know you're very busy, both between your work and your own podcast and the rest. And so, we're scheduled, just so people know, we're doing this very early in the morning by my standards. And
Yes.
I feel good about it. You have been charismatic and kind so far as we're getting started, which I was worried when I got up and it was still dark out and icy. So how are things going for you at work with your podcast? What have you been working on lately?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. So everything is going well. Classes are going well. We're starting our fourth week of classes next week online at the college. And the podcast is going nicely. It's a labor of love, and I absolutely enjoy putting out episodes each week for my listeners. One's coming out today. Hopefully, cross your fingers, get that done today. It's on my list. And it's just so much fun. I don't know about you, but I love learning from everyone who comes on the show. I love learning about topics that we're discussing because it's just like sitting in on a great conversation and you get to soak up so much. So I love that part of the podcast as well. Then, of course, sharing it out with people because then, people get to learn and learning is lovely. And what else am I doing? I just released a digital course about digital portfolios. So that's kind of cool, just for our future teachers. And after being asked semester after semester, what do I put in my student teacher binder? I just decided to create my own and put that out there into the world. So that's a lot of fun. And just, working with future teachers, it's really my jam.
That's awesome. So, I know we want to get into, what we're doing as we're preparing teachers, but I'll just toss this out sort of real quick first. I am in one way, I think, envious of what you do. And in another, in retrospect, I think I'm at least partially glad I didn't go the college route. I originally, about halfway through college, decided I wanted to be a college professor, but I wanted to be an English professor. And my best English professor at James Madison University was not my mentor. I just would show up at office hours and hang out sometimes. And he
Cool.
basically talked me out of it very gently by doing the whole look, so this is the path. This is, what you're up against to get to classes. And he's like, this is how many people apply every time we have an opening. And we hire one person out of 200 and every one of them are on track for a PhD, already have it. And he goes, so just, you're going to be broke until you're 30 and then you're going to be mostly broke after that. And then he goes, eventually it'll be great. And I was like, holy cow. And he goes, or you could go teach high school and get to do a lot of the same stuff. And by the time you're 30, you could already have a house and a family. And I was like, oh my God. And I was horrified by this conversation, and in retrospect, I have some friends who have, worked at universities and, the results vary, but he was not totally wrong. So, for you, how did you get into teaching teachers? Because that's still something I think about sometimes. I'm like, maybe someday, when my pension is secured, maybe I can make that move.
I don't know. I really enjoy it. So I was teaching, I was a special education teacher for 4 years at a school just for kids with disabilities. And during that time, I became the tech coach for the school. So I worked with faculty on using educational technology in their classrooms meaningfully and thoughtfully and purposefully. So thinking about what that was like and working with current teachers was a lot of fun. And during that time also, as teachers, we're continuing to learn. So I got my certification in instructional tech, and Penn State was like, hey, did you know you can roll that into a master's? We're like, let's keep rolling. That sounds like fun. So I did that. And they're like, did you know you can roll that into a PhD and get it paid for with an assistantship? I was like, keep it rolling. Let's do that. So rolled that. And then my husband and I moved up to State College for 3 years, finished my PhD. And I remember it was in April or March of my senior year, or whatever they call that in PhD graduate terms. Right. And I remember sitting at my TA job, and I had all the tabs up with local colleges and universities, employment pages and everything. And I was, doing my Monday morning thing, cup of coffee, got all my tabs going, see what's refreshed. And I remember looking at the posting at Grove City College, and it said, half-time faculty position, you teach future teachers about ed tech, or pre-service teachers about educational technology, and you get to teach faculty about educational technology. I was like, oh, no way. So I refreshed it like multiple times. I was like, no, this cannot be an amazing job. Oh my gosh, it's real. And it's close to home, which is awesome. So I was able to go in, blessed to have the job that I got. I've been there 6 years, and that position has since rolled into a full-time faculty position, working with future educators, and specifically also working with our future special ed teachers. So now teach courses related to ed tech, special ed. Beautiful how it all comes like full circle there. And I also get to oversee a couple of our special ed student teachers. So that has been just such a blessing, and it's been so much fun because it's like, I don't know, working at a college keeps you young, and it just keeps you up to date with all the cool stuff that's going on in education. And you're able to share that with an audience that is just so eager to just learn and keep that and keep those ideas coming. And it's just so much fun. I really, truly enjoy what I do each and every day with our future teachers.
It's awesome. And man, what a path to get there too. Like there's so many sort of fortuitous
Let it
turns there. That's
roll.
great. Yeah. Yeah. I love it. By the way, I love Penn State. If you ask my parents, that's where I was supposed to go to college. So when I went
That's
out of
cool.
state, when I
Awesome,
went out of
awesome.
state to James Madison, they were not, I mean, in the end they were okay with it, but initially they were not thrilled. They're like, we've been taking you to visit Penn State and to Penn State games since you were like 5. What are you doing? I was
Yeah,
like,
seriously, you
I don't
have like
know.
the jerseys, you have the "We
Yeah.
Are," all the ornaments. Yeah, I'm
Everywhere.
with you on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, love it. So okay, so we want to get into some of the details of what you're
Yeah.
doing now with those pre-service teachers, but I personally believe that purpose is very important, that you can't prioritize, or that we can't really properly contextualize any other part of the conversation if we don't know why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. So to you, what is the purpose of education? Thinking maybe specifically first about K-12, and then we can move that into the higher ed and pre-service teachers. But what is it we're trying to get done here?
Sure, and I think that's such a huge question. And I can go at it from many perspectives here. My special ed heart is telling me the purpose of education is to help support students find their value, their talents, their skills, areas of need, and help raise them up to be successful, independent people in society. And then my K-12, training coming in is like, well, it's kind of the same thing for all of our learners, right? We want them all to leave school, understand who they are as a person, understand that they have value, understand that they have gifts and talents, understand that they have glows and grows just like everybody else, and to be as successful and as independent as possible in our larger society. So that's kind of where I'm coming from when it comes to purpose, just helping everyone find their value, their talents, and their strengths. And then also, how can we work to raise up those areas of need?
That's great. And it I think appropriately sort of stated broadly, because when we think about the size of, say, our public school system nationally and the number of students involved, I've talked to some people recently who give a very specific answer, and while I love the focus, I start thinking like, man, how do you scale that? Like, how does that affect
Mhm.
everyone? And so that personal development piece, and sort of helping people to not only improve but understand what they're interested in or good at, I think is really important. Now,
Mhm.
when we transition into the idea of helping pre-service teachers, how does that piece go? Like, do you
Oh,
have
I
this
love
conversation
this.
with that? Because I remember one of the first assignments, in one of the entry education courses is usually like a sort of an early philosophy of education, or why do you want to do it thing. And I remember completely BSing my way through that thing because I was like,
Well,
I
I
don't
blanked out
know.
during that assignment, so I'm
Yeah,
glad
I'm
you
like,
BS'd. I
I'm like,
blanked
I
out.
don't know. I'm just here because I don't know. But so when you're thinking about what we're doing with younger teachers and teacher candidates, what is your goal there in helping them to develop?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. So finding why you want to be an educator of excellence. So did you have an impactful educator in your life? Did you have someone who was not so great as a teacher and you want to change that narrative? Did you have someone who was there for you as a student and they helped coach you through and they helped get you to this one point or pass a test or whatever it might be, or someone who just invested extra time? You're like, wow, that is what a teacher's all about. It's not about delivering that content and passing that test. It's about making those connections and making those relationships. So the purpose of being an education major, I think two sides of the desk. So let's talk about from the student side of the desk. So you're training to be an educator of excellence. You're still learning. You are going into many different schools, many different settings with many different learners. You're trying to soak up as much as you can, learn from different styles, techniques, and strategies that are being used in the classroom. But then you're also on the other side of the desk as a teacher. So thinking about what do these strategies look like in the real world, in the classroom. Let's reflect on that. How are students doing with those objectives, with the way content's being delivered? Let's reflect on how students are being assessed. Am I building those relationships with each and every student that walks into my classroom or attends my Zoom meeting, whatever it might be? Really thinking about being an education major is on both sides of the desk there, and learning how they come together. So you're learning theory and practice, and then you're also learning application and reflection and delivery of the actual art of teaching.
That's great. Now, you said you work primarily with future special education teachers. Is that all the way K through 12, or is it mostly K through 6 or 6 through 12, or like what level are we talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So recently in Pennsylvania, for special education, we just did a pre-K to 8 and then a 9 through 12, but now it's pre-K to 12 for special education, future special education teachers. So, they can figure out in their education career, don't just always go to the same school, the same district, because that's what you're familiar with, but go and branch out, get some experience in elementary, get some experience in middle, and get some experience in secondary, and see what's floating your boat. Because you never know. Whenever I went to college, I wanted to be a first grade teacher. I never was a first grade teacher. And my dad calls up and he says, I remember like very clearly, I was like 20 years old. And he goes, "Hey, Sammy, I saw on the news that you could add special ed to your major. You might want to do that." I was like, "Oh, Dad, I'm 20 years old. I know what I'm doing. I'm not doing that. I'm going to have so much work to do." But I'm so glad I went down to my advisor's office, and I only added it because I was like, "Oh, I'll be more marketable. That'll make me more marketable. I don't really want to do this." But when I went into those classrooms for field experiences, for observations, that is where I found my teaching heart. So you never know what it's going to be, what that experience is going to be until you try those different things. So
Yeah, I fully agree. That's, I didn't want to be a teacher until I was already teaching. Like I was at the tail end of a teacher prep program before I actually thought I might even do it.
oh
Um,
my.
yeah, but it really is. It's like you sort of have to do it. Now, with making a certification K through 12 like that. Now, I think that if you're doing something, say with, ed tech, you're going to be a tech, support, I don't know what you call them in different places.
Tech coach.
We call them an instructional facilitator for technology. They
Oh,
change
that's a big fancy
yeah,
fancy name.
they change their name about every 2-3 years where I work, but that's where we are right now. And for that, I think it makes sense to think K through 12 to go big picture, so that you sort of think about all the tools and can help a lot of people. When I think about both the content and then also some of the pedagogy and the strategies that you would use, on most days, teaching third grade is significantly different than teaching 11th grade. And so while it's good to provide people with both the experience and the diverse options for their career, it also means that the preparation broadens out. And so my question there is, do you think that the balance of providing the additional opportunity and we have a shortage of special education teachers, so obviously making the certification bigger makes it easier
Mhm.
to fill those jobs, but it also presents the possibility that in some way we can be watering down the training because they don't get to target an age group or target those strategies. Do you think in the long run this is something that's going to be good overall for teacher prep, or is this more of a short-term decision to just say we need people, let's get everyone certified the best way we can?
I think overall it's a great move for certification and for teachers in general, because we have students now who are in their college career who only go up to that 8th grade level. Like, well, I actually really like transition, and I like the job coaching, and I like the life skill type stuff that we're teaching in this 8th grade. I love to explore the high school level or get my add-on certificate. So they're still exploring those areas, but now I think with having a more formalized certification. I mean, that's what I was training. I'm K to 12 special education, and there's different ways colleges can go at it. They can have courses designed specifically for our early learners, our preschoolers. How do we identify? How do we assess? How do we see how if students are eligible for special education? And then also have courses designed for transition planning, daily living skills, life skills, all those types of things as well. So having specific courses that they need to take anyway, I think would be really helpful for them to find where's your heart leading you when it comes to teaching students with special needs. And a lot of the strategies and techniques, yeah, they look different with those learners, but they're pretty much best practices that we use across the board anyway, right? I mean, we're using differentiated instruction, we're accommodating and modifying curriculum for our students, we're meeting the needs of our students as they come in as individual learners. So I think it looks different in different classrooms, but those best practices are best practices. That's what we use across the board there.
Great. Yeah. And I think that's a fair point. I tell people that all the time about English class. I teach 11th and 12th grade English, and I say, English class is like baseball practice. As you move up, it gets a little more complicated, but you're always playing the same game, so whether it's t-ball or you are, at the state championship, like it's really the same thing. The question is like, how good are you at the details and things like that, and so in some classes they don't progress that way, but it's skills-based class. We're always kind of doing the same thing. And so that's fair. I think a lot of the strategies can carry over. Now, in regard to how we're preparing teachers, and maybe for this one, maybe consider more broadly, say you wanted to be a first grade teacher. So maybe we think about elementary school for this. A concern that I think a lot of people have, and that has sort of grown on me as I've been a teacher. The longer I've been a teacher, the more I worry about this. In terms of the teacher preparation, we put a lot of time into ed tech, into strategies, into pedagogy. This is something that, I ask about all the time where I work, is why don't we get more content PD? It's always tech or it's always pedagogy. And I think that a lot of people have concerns, and in some cases they're valid. In some cases, I'm not so sure that maybe teacher prep programs are focused so hard on sort of how to teach that we have a lot of people who show up to the classroom who are passionate and who have all these great strategies, but sometimes don't have actual content knowledge. And so, like, is that an issue that you see, either broadly or at your school? What are we doing to help people know what to teach? Because obviously we're spending a lot of time on how to teach.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the beginning of their college career, looking at what are the state standards for your specific content area, for your specific grade level, understanding what they mean, how to look through curriculum, how to find those additional resources outside the textbook to teach those students about that topic area is really important. So here at the college, we have different for our secondary future teachers. They get certified in their content and then also in teaching as well. So if they're a math secondary, they are taking a math major and they're doing a teaching major as well. So they are very fluent in their content area and how to convey that information, because it's great to be content experts, but how do you get that information across to learners? That's very different. That's a very different skill set. So I would say, let's first start off with, what do we need to teach? Look at those standards, look at those Common Core standards, if that it's applicable to your state. And then looking through the curriculum that's being used. So this is a great time when you're in those observation hours and field hours to look at the curriculum, see what curriculum is being used in that classroom, maybe jot it down really quick and look to see the scope of that curriculum, look at the textbooks that are provided, and really dive deep into that content piece so that content in and out. And I know for some of us, whenever we're first year teachers, we might be just a lesson or two ahead of our students when it comes to planning and prep.
Yes, only new teachers are in that situation.
I'm not planning my lesson for tomorrow today.
No, I would never.
Yes, never. No, but still thinking about what that content is and how you can bring outside experiences, outside resources to that content area is also really a fun thing to do for that content. It breaks it up for the students, and it's also fun for the teacher too. It gets variety in there.
Yeah, so it's good. I know that in Virginia, where I live and work now, we a few years ago, several years ago, they passed legislation that said any teacher who was going to be teaching like their own class, so for special education, thinking a self-contained class, had to
Mm-hmm.
be quote unquote highly qualified in the subject
Mm-hmm.
area, which meant not that you actually had to have the degree, but you had to pass the praxis test for like the praxis 2 for the content area. And I think at one point they were pushing for a certain number of college credit hours. And I'm pretty, don't quote me, I think that fell by the wayside because they realized there's no way they were going to get tens of thousands of special education teachers back through all these college courses without helping to pay for it. And the state was like, well, we're not going to
Right.
do that. So,
Right.
but you know, I basically got paid to run sort of test prep for high school special education teachers to help prepare them for the English praxis test. And what I thought was really interesting was these people had wildly different backgrounds. You know, some had
Mm-hmm.
already been like a core content area teacher and then moved to special education. Some of them were career switchers. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
had only ever done special education in the special education like team teacher role. And
Mm-hmm.
so you know, it was really interesting. Like some people just jumped right on and learned all this stuff. And there were a few teachers who were like, I have never once heard any of these things. And I was like, and there was like part of me, I was like, well, I'm happy to teach you. And then silently I was like horrified. So I was like, well, I'm not sure you should be teaching the class if you haven't. So
Right.
maybe it's a good thing that we're doing this.
Right.
And by the way, in Virginia, they do the same way. Like I majored in English and I minored in secondary ed, but it led to the 5-year master's. So same
Mm-hmm.
sort of program. For elementary, do they do like in Pennsylvania, do they do interdisciplinary studies as a major, or is it purely elementary ed? Like here, you usually, most people study interdisciplinary studies where you essentially major in gen ed. You have to take like 4 maths, 4 Englishes, you know, whatever. And then a lot of it goes into the pedagogy and the teaching classes. Is that a similar structure, say in Pennsylvania, or you probably have a better knowledge broadly than I do?
So that's interesting. So we certify pre-K to 4 here in Pennsylvania for our elementary learners. It used to be pre-K to 6. And at our college, we have students take content related to literacy for middle school, literacy for uh, our young learners, our pre-K to firsties, you know. So they focus in on that content area, but they also get that pedagogy alongside it too to help support them.
Nice. Yeah, that over and over, I always say, like, you know, I don't mind going to PD, whether it's school run or county run or they bring someone in or, you know, whatever it is. But I have had more presentations on like ed tech apps, like we've got No Red Ink and Uzella and all these
Mm-hmm.
things, and they're great. But if I sit through one more of those and then someone turns around and tells me, we want you to teach more young adult literature, I'm like, can you please give me an hour session where someone tells me what good young adult literature is? Because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't study it in college and I don't have a ton of free time to do the extra reading. And if we're
Mm-hmm.
being honest, I'm not picking up YA stuff on my own without a
Right.
specific recommendation. And so I think that sometimes we get so focused on how to teach and how to use the tools that sometimes we just assume the people in the room are content specialists, and we should be. But if we're going to engage in continual professional development, I always believe that content should be a piece of that. And I don't know that that happens consistently, you know, across the country. I think division to division that goes very differently. As we think about this concept of, well, broadly teacher preparation, but as we think about what a lot of people are talking about as a national quote unquote crisis of a teacher shortage, I've heard this explained a couple different ways. We have fewer people entering the profession, but you on
Mm-hmm.
the other side also have, as places push for smaller class sizes, that maybe exacerbates the problem a little bit. And so I've heard some people who usually are not, you know, big on funding schools fully and things like that, but we'll
Mm-hmm.
argue that the teacher shortage is completely made up because it's really just a symptom of changing class size stuff. I don't buy that, but there's at
Mm-hmm.
least some validity to the concern. If you think you don't have enough people, why are we creating a situation where we need even more? For your perspective, working in higher ed, how do you see this concept of a teacher shortage playing out, and what do you think we can do to address it?
That is such a big question. I think teacher shortage is, uh, I don't know what causes it. to be honest. And I think sometimes, when we have our future teachers who are in middle or high school and like, hey, I might want to be a teacher one day, or exploring that as a career field, sometimes they get talked out of it, by teachers. Like, do you really want to do this?
I do that, full disclosure.
Do you really want to do this? Let me tell you what it's all about.
Yeah.
It looked glamorous on that side of the desk, but but seriously, I think sometimes we are part of the problem when it comes to teacher shortage, meaning like we might not give depending on the day, we might not give the best explanation of what teaching is all about.
You should ask me in the morning, not in the afternoon.
Yeah. But I think providing our students who want to be educators and fostering that, because I know as elementary students, we might have a lot of kids, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a teacher. And then by the time they're middle school, like, I don't want to be a teacher, that's not cool anymore, or whatever it might be. But really fostering that love for learning, that love for helping others and educating others and being there for others, building those relationships. I think that's something we need to start fostering. And that's something that organizations are doing. There's organizations like Educators Rising that are going out there into middle schools and high schools and be like, hey, we want to help support you, middle school student, to be a teacher. Let's see what it's all about. And they have curriculum and courses and opportunities for them to grow and learn together, instead of whatever the alternative. But I think having more support in schools with organizations like that could really be helpful and help maybe diminish the teacher shortage going into college and, learning to become an educator, then graduating. And then that can also go into that college career where sometimes whenever you're in college, you might not have an education class till your junior year. So making that be something that you have an education class your freshman year, learn about what like teaching basics, I don't know, or teaching 101, but also having that support system with education organizations, Kappa Delta Pi, Educators Rising, things like that, that can help support those who aren't currently in any ed courses. Our freshman and sophomore friends, maybe they might be out there, not at Grove City. At Grove City, we do put them in education courses right away, but having that support system could really be helpful and help carry them through until they have their ed courses under their belt. And I think that's really important, to have that community and have that support and have that passion still around you.
Did you want to be a teacher when you were in high school?
When I was in high school, yeah, I was a part of the Future Teachers of America Club. It's now Educators Rising.
Oh, you know what? They're the same thing. I'm so glad you said that, because like you're saying all these things. I'm like, yeah, we have all that at the school I'm working at. And I'm like, how do we have two of these things? I apparently missed the memo. Okay. So you were in from early on.
Yes. Yeah. I think at one point in elementary school, I wanted to be a doctor or a scientist. Did not go that route. And I don't know when it was when I decided to be a teacher, but I remember having influential educators throughout my K-12 experience. And I just wanted to be like them one day. And then I decided, you know what, I can only be the best Sam Fecich there is. I can't be a Mrs. Angelo or a Mrs. Laza or whatever it might, or whoever it was. I can only be the teacher that I need to be. So finding my own style and my own voice has really been a lot of fun. Throughout your journey, it's something you're always doing, right? You're always finding something to add to your repertoire.
So yeah, I mean, for me, it was very different. Like it's not that I didn't want to be a teacher. I just never gave it any real consideration. But a few of the things you just said and a few minutes ago reminded me of my middle school football team. The head coach for the middle school was like one of the coolest guys, like super charismatic, like great with kids. He actually was like friends with my older sister. I have older sister, like 10 years older. And so he, I sort of knew him a little bit from when I was very young. And he was just like this awesome guy. And I remember I had some friends who, in ninth grade were saying they wanted to be teachers, but a lot of it was just because they kind of idolized him. And his advice over and over was, well, if you're serious about this, you should do special education. He's like, it's about to boom. He's like, there's a ton of jobs. And he goes, if you want to make sure you have a job, special education might be the way to go. And in retrospect, I think he was right. I also think that a lot of the people who were most enthusiastic about it then, sort of because of him, quickly sort of trailed off on it. And I was very much the opposite. Like I sort of found my way into education. And those are always the people I think about. Like, you know, I think that sometimes the teachers we have who get along best with our toughest students were sometimes tough students themselves, or were you know, somewhat disinterested. And, you know, so that's actually the only time I really promote being a teacher is for the kids who I think would be good at it, who don't like school. Because I'm like, I think, you know, you'd be good at this. And like, yeah, I don't know. I just don't like school. And I'm like, right. But that means you know how to make it better. It also means you know how to connect with the
Yes.
kids who don't like it. And so while you never want to discourage someone who's all in, you know, when
Yeah.
someone's like 100%, I want to be a teacher, I sort of start giving the, you know, you sure about that? You know, you whatever. Like, I want you to go with your eyes open, because if you know what you're up against and you choose it anyway, there's a better chance you stick with it. You know, if you go in
Exactly.
not knowing what you're up against, I think that's sometimes where that early, I don't even want to call it burnout. You know, burnout, I think, takes 8 years. You know, when people are 3 years and they flip to something different, I don't think you burned out. I don't think you knew what you're getting into in the first place. But, you know, so the only time for me, though, that I'm like, hey, you should think about being a teacher, you know, is when I know the kid doesn't really like school, but does all the other things well, like solid communication skills, they have a good personality and all that. Because you know, I don't know if that solves our teacher shortage, but I think if maybe we redefine the character traits of what a good teacher is, or at least what that person looks like early on, we can
Yeah.
sort of cast a broader net, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like that happened in college, but I don't think anybody ever raised that issue when I was in high school. You know, and as you pointed out, by the time you're a junior in college, it might be too late, you know, depending on what
Right.
you've chosen for your major or whatever else, you know, and it doesn't mean you can't change later on, but it sure would be great to start funneling the quote unquote right people in the right direction earlier on. How much of say the shortage, and then I want to get back to sort of your broader ideas about like how we can improve school overall, but just with the shortage idea, how much of that do you think has to do with attracting the best candidates in general, just sort of helping people get involved, versus how much of this is the long-term career prospects? You know, like, is it pay and pension? Is it the discussions we have about all the things that schools are facing? Yeah, how is this something that we can just throw some money at, or is this really something that you think is requiring a philosophical change?
I think this is something where we have to have those real conversations with students who are going to be educators. So, knowing that it's not always sunshine and rainbows, you're going to have days where your face hurts from smiling and you are very extremely sad and you're just crying in your car. But I think you also need to have those real conversations, what those expectations are, what expectations are being put on educators. And I think by having conversations with them that are real is more helpful than theoretical. So bringing in guest speakers, bringing in experts in the field related to mental health, related to how do we help our students who are going through trauma, because maybe that's something we didn't learn about during one of our classes. We didn't have a specific class on how do we help students through trauma, and you know, what is secondary trauma, that type of stuff. So thinking about how can we best inform our students by keeping it real, having guest people come into our courses and just open the doors into our classes for other people to speak their truth, speak their voices into, to give students an understanding of what it's like to be a teacher, not every day, because not every day is the same, but what it's like to be a teacher in a real world, not in that ivory tower type, you know, thinking. I mean, sometimes we come in to our classes and students think that their kids are going to be sitting at their desk, hands folded, waiting, you know, for their every word, you know, to be shared. But I don't think I've ever had a class like that. um, but, you know, there's a reality check that needs to be done. And I think understanding what teaching is all about, and you know, partnering students up early with educators can really be helpful for them to see what it's like, because they only see one side of the desk when they enter college. They only see that student perspective. So what is it like on the other side of the desk, and giving them that experience early could also help. You know, if they want to change their major, they can do it and it's early enough to do so, or really solidifying, yes, this is absolutely what I want to do, but maybe I want to try a different grade level, maybe I want to try a different subject area, maybe I want to add this other thing into here. So really giving them those experiences early on, real life experiences in the field, I think could also be very helpful.
Yeah, I love it, because for me, you know, didn't necessarily want to be a teacher until I was nearly done with the program. And the
Mhm.
thing that did it for me was actually the classroom experiences.
Mhm.
I did like
Mhm.
the 1 week practicum where you just sort of hang out and watch and then teach like one
Yeah.
lesson at the end. And then, hey, like that was cool. And I got like very good feedback. And which I love good feedback, but I walked out of there thinking like that was trash. Like I could have done that so much better now that I saw how that played out. And I got
Mhm.
like glowing reviews. And I was like, wow, thanks. Like, are you sure? Like you just being nice? Cause I can do that better. And then you do like teach for the whole week and then eventually student teach. It was actually in the classroom that I thought, this is something I might be into. Like I can do this. I like working with these kids. Like this is cool. And I almost wish that I'd had those opportunities earlier because I sat through
Yes.
all the classroom stuff first. And they're teaching us like, oh well, this was what Dewey said, and this is what so and so said, and this
Do
is the,
we?
and I'm like, all right, cool. I can write a paper on that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Never like couldn't make a meaningful connection because I hadn't actually taught. Now I'm super interested in some of that stuff, but when you told me before I was in the classroom, and it didn't really matter. It was sort of
Right.
an exercise in the abstract. And I don't want to say it didn't help. I think that changing the sequence could have helped more. And
Mhm.
I think getting people into the classroom earlier, because there's some people who love the idea of teaching, get in the room and go, no, no, no. Like I
Right.
had I
You
had
like the
several friends.
idea of it.
Yeah. I had several friends who went the whole way through the program, student taught, and by the end of student teaching, were like, I'm not going to apply for teaching jobs. I'm like,
Mhm.
well,
What are
you
you gonna do?
what are you going to do? Yeah, like but wouldn't it have been cool for them to have figured that out earlier? And maybe for
Exactly.
other people who weren't really attracted by those classroom sort of studies, to get the classroom experience, go, oh, you know what, I do like that, because then maybe it feels worth fighting through the parts you don't love as much.
Exactly.
The sequence
Yes.
I think can be really, really important in how we do that. So for you, let's think, let's go to ideals. Let's be idealistic for a
Mhm.
moment. And if you want, you can answer this two ways. You certainly don't have to, but I ask every guest, what would be your ideal school? So thinking K through 12, you can focus on whatever level you like. What would that be if you were given sort of the freedom of, say, a private or like charter school? Essentially, you have a budget. Kids have to learn and they can't die, but you can do anything else that you want. Um, what would that be? And then if you want, we can spin that into if you could run your own teacher prep program if you like. But thinking somewhere in that K through 12 sort of area, what for you would be the best kind of school? Like what would you want to run and deliver to a community?
I think, when you talk about your ideal school, I think my ideal school already exists. And what's really interesting is as a college professor, you get to go in and you get to see lots of different schools and you get to see lots of different methods, lots of different strategies being used. But I think one that really sticks out in my mind is Montour School District, and that's here in Pennsylvania. They're on several lists to watch and things like that. But what they have and what they've done with their students is just so cool. So when you walk into the building, they have partnered with the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, and they have art and things like that, which is really cool. You go into their cafeteria, which is a big open space with like booths and traditional, tables with stools, and kids can sit wherever they like. There's comfy chairs and like cafe tables, which is really cool. Um, their learning spaces are really interesting. So I had a couple of student teachers there for, I think it was like 2 years ago, and the special education teachers got to design their own classrooms and what they would look like. They're big open spaces. They all have their own accessible restrooms for their students. They have the technology that they need. They have the different types of furniture to interact with their students, maybe a small group or a kidney table. They have different types of furniture for students to just, hang out on if they need that for positioning. And I just think that's pretty cool. Giving teachers the freedom to design their own classrooms is pretty amazing. They also have the only Lego lab in the country. So they've partnered with Lego and they have their own Lego lab there for students to do stuff with STEM and to do creative learning. I think is really interesting. They also have their own area for students to learn about entrepreneurship and develop products and create products and make them and so that's pretty cool. And other schools are doing similar things like Fab Labs. They're creating these spaces for students to learn and create and just, be little entrepreneurs, which is really awesome. So they're learning skills that you can't do a multiple choice test on, but they're learning those skills that they're going to need later in life to be independent, successful adults. They're learning through mastery learning. They're learning through making mistakes and trying new things. I think it's really amazing the things that our schools are doing. Grove City Area School Districts also has a lab for their students to do those types of things too, to create their own stuff. And I just think, I think my ideal school exists. It's a space for students to create and learn through making mistakes, through trying different methods, through trying different things, through that mastery learning option there, and just, having them show what they know in ways that can't be done on a test.
That's awesome. And I actually sort of envision something like that, like, it more, say even for the high school level, and maybe by high school, I think that there's certain sort of content that we want to push, but, the ability to create something like that at the elementary school level, I think in some ways is easier to do because your average elementary school has fewer kids. You have a little bit more flexibility in how you can sort of engage the students that way. Aside from the money to secure the furniture and things like that, which really shouldn't be an issue if you prioritize it in the budget, you could definitely do it. I think that testing is a thing that sometimes pops up in the way. I for years have taught 11th grade, which is the only grade in high school in Virginia where kids take the standards of learning. We don't do Common Core. We have like the SOL, standard of learning tests, and 11th grade is the only time they take the English tests. And so there's a writing test, a 2-day writing test in March, a reading test in May. And so there are times where, I have a group of high functioning students and I'm like, all right, well, we can basically ignore the test. So let's, and I have a lot more freedom in terms of what they can work on or how they can work together. And when I find myself with, struggling students, and I usually, that's sort of where I usually sort of go to the high and the low. I've at this point in my career, I've given up on the middle. Like I just, give me the kids who need the most help, or give me the kids who already are good at all the basics, and let me extend it as far as we can go. But with those needier classes, I usually find myself at the beginning of the year doing a lot of fun stuff like that. And then as we get like into midwinter, I'm like, all right, guys, tests are coming up. Here we go. Like, we got to grind this out. And I hate saying it, but the reality is like, there's so much that hinges on it, their graduation and the school's accreditation and all this kind of stuff. So if we could ease up on some of the testing, personal opinion, I think more teachers would be willing to take the risks that are necessary to find ways to make those things work in the school. I think that a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this as much or more than anyone else, when we see those sort of immediate tests and, those immediate sort of needs, sometimes it's hard to take the risks that would be required to implement what you're talking about. And I fully agree. I think it's a great school model, but if we don't adjust the way we're going to assess, like if we don't change the way we quote unquote like score the game, then it's hard to change how you play it. And I think for a lot of teachers, if we're serious about that kind of innovation, then we've got to go to sort of top policy levels and think, what can we do to allow people the ability or the freedom to innovate like that? So, all right. So we're going to get into sort of the final wrap up here. We've got 2 pieces left. One is kind of an open mic. So I let any guest, if there's anything that we either didn't talk about or we talked about and moved on to briefly, or if anything that I said that makes me sound like a dummy, you have total free mic to run with it and say whatever you like. And then we'll wrap up with some book and movie recommendations. But is there anything else that you want to either talk about, clarify, promote, anything like that we didn't address or didn't do justice to?
I just wanted to share like how teaching is that it's one of those fields where learning never stops. And just because you cross that stage of graduation doesn't mean that you know everything there is to know about teaching. You will never learn another new thing. So when it comes to those professional developments like we were talking about earlier, you can go out and pursue your own PD that speaks to your teaching heart. Now, if it's for credit or for hours, that's a whole other thing. But like, there's so many opportunities to keep learning and keep growing and finding more areas in which you're glowing and growing in education, because you're always getting better at it. and, whether it's listening to podcasts or attending webinars or speaking at conferences and webinars, continuing, if reading's your thing, if that's your thing, or listening to audiobooks. So I think knowing that teaching doesn't end and learning doesn't end when you cross that stage of graduation. In fact, it's just beginning, and keeping that mindset of always being a learner just alongside your students, just like your students are. So that's what I would like to put out there.
Yeah, that's great. And we talk a lot about being a lifelong learner and creating lifelong learners in schools. And, that probably has to start with the teachers. So, if you ever find yourself, as I occasionally do, but, if you ever find yourself grumbling about professional development, like, stop it. Just stop it. By the way, and like I said, I don't grumble because I have to do it. I just sometimes wish we had different options for it.
Sure. Yeah. And that would be great too, right? If there was like, hey, here's your choice board of PD options. You pick one. We will give you hours for that.
Yeah, and we actually do that, but the choice board always sort of like it's all the same color, so to speak.
All
like
lean like towards ed tech.
It's all, yeah. It's like, well, here you have all of these ed tech options, or you have all of these strategy options, and like, can somebody just teach me about a new book? Like, I would love that.
Sure, right.
So, all right. So as we wrap up every episode, I ask guests for book and movie recommendations. So this can be anything for fun, or it can be related to education. If you have written something you would like to promote, you toss this in at this moment as well. What do you have that listeners should check out?
Yes, I have some Hulu recommendations. So currently on my Hulu list would definitely be Lost. I think I'm rewatching it for like the 5th time. I love Lost. It is definitely one of my favorites. Things to watch while you're grading, or watch while you're giving some feedback. But I also like it because I reference it in class pretty regularly, especially for our exceptional learners class, where we talk about every student comes into your classroom with strengths, talents, gifts, but they also come in with areas of need. So don't always focus on what they can't do. So don't be like people telling John Locke, don't tell me what I can't do. Focus on those strengths, focus on those areas where they're glowing, and then bring them up alongside with their areas of need. So huge Lost fan. Definitely love the Dharma Initiative. I used to have a Swan Station mug, but I broke it in the microwave. It was not microwave safe, and it was very sad. And that was a very sad day for me. Maybe I'll get another for Valentine's Day coming up soon. I really hinted to that to my husband this week. So hopefully I will have a new mug.
Yeah, there you go.
But my book recommendation would have to be my books, EduMagic, A Guide for Pre-Service Teachers, and EduMagic Shine On, A Guide for New Teachers, where it walks through the future teacher one, where it walks through what I wish I learned whenever I was in college as a college ed major. Talks about, going beyond, like, learning doesn't mean an A. Learning means really diving into that content, going in there with purpose, and going in there with the expectation of, I'm going to learn something new from this class. I get to go to class today. That is awesome. Not, I have to go to class. I got to wake up at 8:30 and I got to go to class today.
You know what?
No, I get to go to class. And
that is such an important semantic distinction. Like, I try to be so careful about that. I have a 2 and a 4-year-old, and my 4-year-old is like, they did like a daycare, and then pandemic hit, we kept him home. And then he was, at the end of last summer, he just wanted to go to school. He wanted to be around other kids. Yes. So we found a local half day, like pre-K. Then they were being reasonably safe about it. We're like, let's go. But here and there, he'd have those days where it's like, I just don't want to go. Like, I don't want to go today. And I kept reminding my wife and myself, but I found myself telling her, I think a little more often, like, we need to say, you get to go to school today. So when he's like, I don't want to go, I'm like, no, you get to go to school today. Because as soon as you start saying, when a kid's 4, when they always hear you have to go, at some point they're going to push back, whether it's when they're 4 or they're 14. So I think there's probably
going on 14, which is what I have at my house, a 4-year-old going on 14.
But and I think that's probably equally important for the teacher. Some days, yes, you have to go to work, but even when you have to go to work, you should probably remember that you get to teach, something like that. Like, there's a lot of little things we do with our language that I think reveals maybe how we're feeling in the moment. But if we could change the word, sometimes the mindset goes with it. And so I fully agree. And so you have 2 books. I knew you had one. I didn't know you had 2 books.
So the other one is
that's
for
awesome.
new teachers. And it talks about these disappointments you're going to have your first year. It's going to talk about how you're an unstoppable educator, how keep that learning going, learn from your mistakes, self-care, which is something I wish I learned in college, as a student, because I think setting boundaries and caring for yourself is one of the most important things you can do for a teacher, as a teacher, and for yourself as a future educator. And I think that's so often like one of those things we talk about, oh yeah, scheduling some time for yourself, but really like, how do I do that? What does that look like? It looks different for everybody. So EduMagic Shine On is definitely geared for that first year educator, beginning teacher, and then the EduMagic, a guide for pre-service teachers, is geared towards those students who are going into education and getting into the best profession on the planet, teaching.
Well, I'm glad you said that. That's excellent. All right. Well, Dr. Sam Fecich, I appreciate you taking the time to talk on the ClassCast podcast today. How can people get in touch with you? How can listeners track you down if they want to learn more or have any questions?
Yeah, of course. You can head on over to sfecich.com. That's SFECICH. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at sfecich, SFECICH. Keep it simple.
That's good. Consistent branding. Very nice.
Yeah, pretty important, right?
It is. All right. Well, this has been the ClassCast podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. You can find the ClassCast podcast on all major streaming services, plus YouTube, and at www.classcastpodcast.com. If anyone has any questions or comments, there's a contact form on the website. I would love to hear what you think, both about this conversation and others. Hope everyone has a great day.